say. And then I'm going to say I'm Julianna, and this is your church ready for Gen Z and beyond at 2 in room 33? Yes. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll leave the door open in case we have some latecomers who have to shamefully sit in the front row. But I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we keep ourselves a little bit on time. So my name is Julianna Shults. I am a program manager with LCMS Youth Ministry, and my job is in what we call resources and leadership. And one of those roles is to, I get to look at all of the research and I get to help plan some of our research. And so you're about to get a bit of a nerdy presentation with quite a lot of data. So you're in Gen Z, and you're just ready for Gen Z and beyond. If you're in the wrong classroom, now is the time to leave. Otherwise, we will try and talk a little bit about generational data, the things that we know both about Gen Z and the things that we're learning about Gen Alpha. And as we're thinking through that, looking at that and breaking it down to think about what does that mean for us in our congregational settings. Ultimately, what does that mean for us in helping to share Jesus with young people and help them to be disciples of Jesus Christ for life, right? So that's our goal, right? Our time today is to break some of those things down. And so we're going to try and be really interactive. So if you have questions, raise your hand. We're going to try and have a little bit of go back and forth. So you don't have to listen to me the whole time. Some of you have seen some other Gen Z presentations. So if you have other updated data that you want to throw in there, we'd love to hear that as well. But before we go too far, we're going to talk about what that generational timeline looks like. So we're going to call you out if you're willing and figure out who is in our room right now. Right? So we're going to start with boomers. I'm assuming we don't have any builders in the room. So 1946 to 1964, who wants to admit that they're in that era? Excellent. Hi, boomers. Gen X, 65 to 80. Okay, love it. Millennials, 81 to 96.
There's Zenmennials and then those.
I know, we'll get there. All right. So broad strokes. All right. Any Gen Z, 97, there we go. All right, you guys, welcome to the presentation. You get to jump in anytime you want when I'm wrong. All right. I don't think we have any alphas. No, because they're all babies. They started in 2012. So they're about, kind of 10. This is kind of the top right there. Now, why do we separate them by these spans, right? So, like how did we get here? So the thing that we know about generational data is that we kind of chunk it out by parent to kid, right? And they're about 15 to 20 year spans. And the thing that we're trying to highlight here is the markers that are significant life and world events, contemporary issues, formative technologies that happen at a particular age. Kind of a funky way to say it. So, for example, boomers, what are some things that were key for your generation, like formative, cultural, technological things that happened for your generation? World events, yeah.
The NASA program.
There you go, the NASA program. Korean War.
The end of Vietnam.
End of Vietnam, right?
And color TV.
Color TV, right? Absolutely. How about Gen X? Cell phones.
Computers.
Car phones, but starting that technology's starting to get more accessible here.
Two assassinations. Kennedy and King.
Yeah, absolutely.
Video games.
Yeah.
Challenger explosion.
Yeah.
Okay. Latchkey kids. We see a lot of latchkey kids that happen here. Millennials. 9/11.
Cell phones. Smartphones. Home computers. Tablets.
Yeah. Think 2008 recession hit millennials at a really critical time.
Yep.
Right. So some life things that are happening here. Gen Z.
Grew up
online. Digital natives, our first generation of digital natives, right? Social media, right? They're growing up with it instinctively, right? Right. So you see, the things that we're thinking about here are things like the difference between having a landline, and that being the only way you can communicate, to never not having a cell phone, right? And how that changes and forms the way that you understand the world, right? We think about Gen Z. 1997 is about the year we're using, in part because Gen Z has no personal memory pre 9/11, right? Or really, some of them were alive, but none of them does it. It's not as it's a historical event rather than a personal one, right? And the instinct that we have there, right? So now. Somebody else pointed well, I'm an X-Ennial, right? Okay, so the thing we have to remember here is when we're talking generational data, we're talking large scale, 100,000, 3,000 foot view, right? There's a lot of nuance in 15 to 20 years. So for example, we have what we would call X-Ennials, which is a micro generation that's like the latest Gen Xers to the beginning, the elder millennials here.
They're just the millennials that want to be a part of Gen X.
That's the Gen X, right?
No, it's Gen X who wants to be part of millennials.
Oh, no.
Okay, but so we have this little micro generation here, right? And there are little overlappy generations here, right? That have a little bit of nuance, right? I was born in here, right? So we had a computer when I was growing up, but it was a family bulky computer, right? So I had internet access, but it was dial-up, right? So there's some nuance there.
You know the sound that creates all generations?
Yeah. Okay. Versus later millennials that don't understand that time, didn't had it a lot earlier, right? So you're gonna have some nuance. The other nuance is I'm gonna say some stuff about a generation, and you're gonna be like, I don't think that's true for my kids. It might not be, right? Your kids, the young people in your congregation, are individual, unique creations by God. And they're going to be, in some ways, different from the people around them. So just because I say something is true about Gen Z or Gen Alpha doesn't necessarily make it true for every Gen Z and every Alpha. It's not a reliable thing to just paint with such big a brush, right? And that was true even with Boomers, right? Some of the big brushes that we're going to paint with are often indicative of just the age of that next person. Right? So there's some things that we are currently saying is true about Gen Z or Gen Alpha that has a lot to do is painted by the fact that they're just young right now, right? The things we say there were the same things we said about Xers or millennials when they were young, right? There is always somehow a bit of a push and pull against age and wisdom and youth and those things are always going to be true. So we're going to try and break up those things to kind of dive in a little deeper and look at some of the nuance that we're going to get when we think about these things, and particularly with the cultural things that are happening. Okay, but before we do that, I'm gonna actually do it on both computers. There we go. Where are we trying to get? What do we want our young people to have? So I work for LCMS Youth Ministry, and we talk about our 7 healthy practices of youth ministry. And when we talk about our 7 healthy practices, we say we want our young people to deeply understand their baptismal faith. We want them to have a resilient identity in Christ, and we want them to live out their unique vocations. So all of the information we're going to gather today, ultimately we want to see, okay, how does that help them deeply understand their baptismal faith? How does that help them have a resilient identity in Christ? How does that help them to live out their unique vocations, right? So we don't just learn it, but we're learning it for a purpose. This is where we want to head. Now, I'm going to suggest we have kind of 5 semi-overlapping concepts that we're seeing in both Gen Z and in Gen Alpha. And I'm going to actually put that slide up. Right? That they are safety-seeking problem solvers. Right? That they are developing their identity via an algorithm. Right? That they're connected without community. That they're diverse and divided. And that they're looking for influence over expertise. Okay? Now, there's a lot to dig into these, but these are going to be kind of the 5 places that we're going to try and get to, right? So if you, we're going to see how fast we can move through these, but this is kind of where we're headed, okay? Let's start with safety-seeking problem solvers. And let's start with this, right? When we think about particularly Gen Z, right, we identify that they have never really known a world that is safe and secure, right? Coming into a world post 9/11, their world has not necessarily been particularly secure. You also have to think about, which one other Gen Z presentation she talked about, the number of school shootings that these young people have faced, the economic crisis that they watch their siblings, their aunts or uncles, their grandparents, their parents deal with in 2008, and then with COVID, right, added to this level of insecurity in the world around them, right? And that insecurity in the world around them has caused them to do a couple of things. And one of those things is to become more and more risk averse, okay? Everything is insecure, and so I'm going to do my best to try and control that. We're going to talk a little bit later. I'm going to try to achieve and be perfect in every way that I can. I'm going to try and control as much as I can to prevent things from falling apart, to prevent things from being insecure, to prevent things from being safe, right? And so they become risk averse in some really positive ways, right? We're seeing risky behavior go down. The CDC just released some data that said drinking is down. We know that the age where people are having sex is getting older and older, right? We know that marijuana use is actually down, which is interesting considering the legalization of that, right? With young people, right? Not tremendously, but it's down a tad, right? But we're also seeing risk aversity in things like they are not getting their driver's license. And I just saw some new data, right? It said while in 1997, 43% of 16-year-olds and 62% of 17-year-olds had a driver's license. In 2020, 25% of 16-year-olds and only 45% of 17-year-olds have their driver's license.
Do you think part of that is affected by places being closed, like this offer to get a driver's license?
That number has actually been going down for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Not that significantly down, so it might be that some places are closed. But it's also, I have a different relationship with my parents. My parents drive me everywhere, and I don't feel I can connect with my friends without going to them. I connect with them at my house, so I don't need to have a driver's license to get to my friends, because my friends are on my screen.
Is that from Culture Translate?
Yeah. But I had it before, but I was like, but these are new stats. I put them in there, right? Okay, so the driving, hesitating when it comes to challenge. So, especially you're doing youth ministry, and you're like, we're going to do this new exciting thing that you've never done before. Do you sense a little bit of resistance sometimes from your young people? They're like, okay, but tell me all of the details about that so that I don't, so that I can make that a little less risky for you. We saw that with LCMS youth gathering. We saw when we were talking to young people, they wanted to know, okay, so, but like, what room am I going to sleep in? Where am I going to eat? Who am I going to eat with? What sessions am I going to go to? When am I going to go to them? When am I, like, logistics that I didn't think, I was like, got on a bus. Somebody took me somewhere, and I showed up, and I was like,
I slept on the floor.
okay. And I didn't have a cell phone, and like, I just.
That's why anxiety's through the roof, because there's so much to try to control.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? So we see this mental health, right, compared to other generations, right? That they have the lowest level of positive mental health, right? We're only 45% today have very good or excellent mental health. But then also think about this, right? The news events that are stressing Gen Z. Literally everything, right? Mass shootings, rise in suicide rates, global warming, immigration, sexual harassment and assault. Like, there is nothing that they are not worried about, right? I cannot tell you, like, for me, when I was a teenager, I was not even aware of half of these things, right? I didn't even have access to this information. And so not only is the world unsteady, but my access to understanding the world's unsteadiness is constantly in my face. Yeah, that would make you a little risk averse, I think.
Are their suicide rates higher?
So much higher, like a terrifying amount higher, yeah. Which makes us say, like, yes, some of this is a more openness to talking about mental health, right? So we see mental health numbers rise a little bit because they're more open to talk about it. But because we're seeing suicide rates grow so high, we know that part of that is just genuinely their mental health is not as solid as maybe older generations. Yeah.
How much is that affected by their parents who kind of grew up during the really bad times and it hasn't gotten any better?
Yeah.
So they pass it on to their kids. How much?
Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily have a stat on. I mean, like, I do think parents are protective. Certainly we see parents being very protective of young people, and are not necessarily, it is not as encouraged for them to go out and do risky behavior. Not risky, but like to take any kind of risk, right? When your kid pushes back and says, I don't want to do that risky thing, it's like, oh, okay, that's fine, right? So I don't try out for the team. I don't put myself out relationally. I don't go to places that I'm uncomfortable in, even if it's a safe place, like a youth group or like a sports, or an extracurricular activity. Like if that makes me nervous and I don't do it, and parents aren't necessarily pushing for safe risk, if does that make sense? And that feeds that cycle, right? But also, they just spent 2 years inside the house with their parents as their parents talked about really difficult things in the world, right? And especially when we think Gen Alpha, right? Young people, very young people, who spent a lot of time in the last years in their house with stressed out parents who maybe weren't always, who were talking about all the things that are wrong. I mean, I can only imagine, I think we're still starting to see the data roll in about like how having a conversation about COVID in your house with a child in grade school, like what does that do for them over time in terms of being afraid of the world? Yeah. I saw another hand right there, yeah.
Well, the other piece too is like when we were growing up as kids, worst case you're watching Beavis and Butthead or something on
Yeah.
MTV that your parents are like, when you hear that channel, don't you watch it. Where kids, Generation Z now, they know they can go to YouTube and search, not even YouTube anymore. It's TikTok, it's all these other things where you can just spend 20 minutes, get all these other crazy, my sister's she's mentally a child, still an adult, my youngest sister. There's stuff on TikTok, she'll just scroll through it, I'm like, what are you, like, watching?
Right? So whereas, I'm an elder millennial, right? Whereas, like, I knew there was a war in Desert Storm, and, like, I kind of knew that was a thing that was happening. Like, that was the extent of what I knew about it. When Russia invaded Ukraine, my TikTok was feeding me live TikTok views of war.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, tanks running over cars.
I'm watching people sit through bombings. Right? That is a whole other thing, especially for an adolescent mind that's trying to understand their place in the world. Right? And so there's a couple of good things that have happened. The first one is they deeply care about people in the world. Right? They are incredibly conscientious about what's happening in our world. They're empathetic. They love and they want to care well for other people. And I think there's a lot of places where we can say, yeah, God's given you vocations to do that. God's given us vocations as people in this world to be his hands and feet, and we want to lean into that vocation, but also some space for us to say, like, okay, but also, like, there are good things here. Like, you are safe, and how do we find you some space where you understand that there is safety and security in your world? They can synthesize information and come up with incredibly creative solutions to problems. Right? Have you seen the new thing that college students are doing called Borgs? Right? So they're these 2-liter containers, and they fill them with like liquid IV and juice, and they put alcohol in them, right? And they're little surreptitious, and they have a lid. Okay, and I'm looking at this and I'm going like, okay, so the problem they're solving is I can't trust drinks from other sources. Right? Because my world is unstable and people might, I'm aware that like people might drug my drink. So I'm going to create my own drink that has a lid that I can control, that I can navigate through the world. Now, it's still a risky behavior. You don't want to drink an entire 2 liter vodka. That's not a great idea. But like, they figured out a problem. They figured out a solution. They also figured out how to put stuff in there so that they don't get us hungover. Again, problem solving, right? Like, they're great problem solvers. You saw them in COVID. They figured out how to have prom online. They figured out how to do drive-through graduations. Like, they figure out how to do things. They're incredible problem solvers. But just because they can solve a problem doesn't mean they're resilient. Right? Just because I can solve a problem doesn't mean I'm okay. Right? And so I think the thing that we see is, hey, this young generation, they're go-getters, they're entrepreneurs, they're figuring it out, right? They're solving the problems that they're seeing in the world, and yet we're not stopping to say, like, okay, just because they can doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing all right. Right? So how are we checking in on that? One of the ways we know this is that 61% of young people say the adults in my life don't truly know how much I'm struggling with my mental health. Adults don't know. I got to put on a good face. I got to put up a good social media post. I got to be happy. I got to show everybody around me that I'm okay. And actually, I can do a pretty decent job of problem solving around that, figuring out how to do that. But inside, I am really struggling. Yeah.
I also think though, like, I've seen a lot of students celebrate their mental health issues. Like, it's almost like,
Yeah.
and I look at I'm a millennial, and I've been doing youth ministry with high school students for 10 years, and I have a Gen Z daughter, and, you know, there's, oh, my therapist, or, oh, yeah, like it's almost, and I'm like, when I was growing up, if you had a mental health issue, you didn't talk about it with your friends.
Yeah.
But now, it's almost like a badge of honor. Like, that sounds really funny, but it's almost like a joke at this time. So I always struggle with, they're sharing, but they're really not going deep, right? Like, they're like, oh yeah, it's cool to do this, or, oh, like, they're self-diagnosing too.
Isn't there like a FOMO of not having mental health issues?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of things happening here, right? So one of them is, right, so we put mental health in this category where, like, it's a part of my identity formation, right? And so, like, if I'm struggling, then I can add this to my identity and somehow that, and with that, I do think there is a struggle of, are you seeking therapy and the things that you need to help, right? Are you looking to I don't want to say solve the problem, not the right term, sorry. But like, are you looking for some level of healthiness, wellness, right? Are you looking to actively seek for wellness, or are you just living there and using it as a part of your identity?
Yeah.
I think that's a good question to ask. I think the other part of that is that the CDC just came out with a stat, and I'm going to read it so I get it right. Nearly 3 in 5 teenage girls said they felt persistently sad and hopeless. Right? 30% say they have seriously considered dying by suicide, a percentage that has risen nearly 60, has risen hugely in the last 10 years, right? So part of me goes, yes, I want to make sure that I'm not making that a core part of my identity, that I'm broken, right? We have, but also, I don't want to dismiss that, right? Because they really are struggling. Right? And so how do I open up the conversation to get a real pulse? Right? So just because their social media looks good and they're showing up to youth group or they're showing up to church and they look okay, how are we really checking in and giving them space so they can be open and honest about what's going on? And then how do we help them find the resources, find the support, find the places where they're going to be able to seek wellness and wholeness in Christ? Right? Does that make sense? Are we tracking that? It's a pendulum swing, right? Everything is, right? I'm glad we're talking about it, right? I'm glad that it's more intense, but also then how do we make sure that we're talking about it in a way that helps promote them getting the help that they need, right? And navigating through that. Yeah.
You touched on this a bit, they care deeply about the world. I would add specifically about environmental concerns. They are bombarded with all the environmental issues that are out there.
Yeah. I mean, some people are saying that the driving rates or driver's license rates are low because they want to be more conscious about how they're bringing, their oil usage. They're more aware of how their decisions impact the world, right? So there's really positive things there, right? And I think that's where vocation and us teaching vocation can be really powerful in the world, and like how we do those things, but also, how do we do that without teaching that everything's something to be afraid of, right? All right, so really, we're looking for some confidence in Christ, right? Service and leadership, right? Remembering that we have a place in Jesus, in our church, that is safe, right? That we have hope that they can't find anywhere else, right? And making sure that that is the thing that we're saying over and over to them, right? That no matter what happens in this world, that Jesus has overcome. He's died on the cross for you, right? Like, how do we keep reminding them of the promises we have in God and the hope we have that are true no matter what happens in the world around them? Like, we have a message that they need to hear really desperately, right? And so leaning into that for us is really important. Okay. Moving on to identity development via algorithms, right? So Gen Alpha, you got to remember, Gen Alpha is the most technologically illiterate generation. They have swiped before they could read, right? Gen Alpha knew how to work your iPhone better than you did when they were toddlers, right? I had my nephew who's Gen Alpha figured out how to FaceTime me on his iPad while his mom is running around the house chasing him, right? He knew which buttons to push to get Auntie Julianna, and I was like, why is he calling me on a Sunday morning? And answering it, and he's just, he runs around the house, right? And he's trying to talk to me while his mom's trying to get in the car for church, right? So, this is their natural inclination, right? If you've watched Gen Alpha with a screen, they always assume it's a touch screen. Always. Why is the screen not swiping? Right? That's the assumption is that, right? And so the young people who are developing the values they have, technology is going to play a role in this, right? Technology is just going to play a role. We're not going to avoid it, right? It's more about how are we helping them navigate that identity formation with technology being such a big deal, right? Now here's the thing we want to remember. So we see these are different. The rise of TikTok. Where's TikTok? Why is my thing gone? Right, 67, right? YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, right? The thing we want to recognize about these particular things, particularly TikTok and YouTube.
No, I thought TikTok was dangerous to our people. Am I hearing wrong information?
I would
gun.
say,
It's a tool. You can hunt and get food, and you can hurt people.
right. I would say certainly we are conscientious of any social media that is free because they are selling your data, right? Right, and that's true of all social media. So we have to be conscientious of if we're not paying for it, they're getting paid for by using our data. That's the world that we live in, right? So we have to be conscientious of that. I do think TikTok has one of the most ridiculously good algorithms ever, right? And the danger, which frankly, I am a full-grown adult who falls into this, which is it feeds me exactly what I want to see to the point where I can't get my eyes away from it, right?
Yes.
It knows how much I watch and what I watch. And if I watch something, even if it makes me angry, in fact, if it does make me angry, but I watch it, then they'll feed me more of that because they know I'm going to watch it. Right? And here's what happens. It feeds me what I want to see. And if I start to see things that are untruthful, right? Things that are weird conspiracy theories, right? If I start to go down a rabbit hole of YouTube and TikTok, both do this, down a rabbit hole of like, these people are crazy. I don't know what they're talking about. But I'm watching it because I'm interested, and suddenly that's all it wants to show me. And then suddenly over time, it sounds more reasonable and more reasonable. And now I've watched 16 hours of conspiracy theories about reptoids, and like, right? And now I'm in a different spot.
Well, the other thing, and I'm not knowledgeable about this, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
My understanding is that it's coming from China, and that our own government is saying to schools and stuff, don't let your children be on the TikTok website.
Yeah, they're definitely. I have yet to see anything. How do I put this? I hear that concern. I don't think it's wrong, but I don't think anybody has any proof. Does that make sense?
I don't know. That's
Yeah.
why I'm asking.
It's one of these weird things where, like, it is. I mean, the company is based in China, but so are a lot of companies, and so like it's hard to tell what they're really mining because they're not disclosing it, and so it's hard to tell whether it's dangerous or not. Does that make sense?
At least compared to other.
Yeah, compared to others, for sure. I think there's some additional concerns to TikTok that maybe you wouldn't see necessarily with others. But let's also not be realistic. Facebook is mining your information, so is Google, right? Like, everybody is mining your information. Right? Right. Which is also Instagram, which is also like Goodreads, which is also, right? Like, everybody is to some degree, right? Now, so I think the thing that we have to be cognizant of is helping people step far enough away from that to say, I got to be aware of that. I've got to know what I'm getting myself into. I have to know what is speaking into my mind, right? And also to help them to understand that these things are designed to feed you information in a specific way to keep you there, right? And it is not just a passive action. You have to actively say, I'm going to set limits here. I have to actively say, I'm going to pay attention to what I'm listening to, what I'm hearing. I have to actively say, I got to filter that information in a specific way. Because if I'm passive, even just a little bit, this stuff will feed you all sorts of nonsense, right? And this is not just teenagers. This is adults too, right? I ended up in some weird spots on YouTube or others that I'm just like, where did this come? And like now I'm here and I'm on a rabbit hole. And at least as an adult, I can recognize what's happening. But as a young person, I might not, right? And so that can be really difficult, right? So this is what Barnes says, and this is pre-COVID, right? So pre-COVID, we know that this is about the number of hours of screen media that an average 15 to 23-year-old had. Okay? That's a year. Sorry, that's a year. In a year. So it averages out to about 7.5 hours a day of screen media. Right? Now, a church-going 15 to 23-year-old is going to take in about a little less than 300 hours of any kind of spiritual content. So that's going to church, it's reading the Bible, it's praying, it's listening or reading to Christian content, it's talking about faith. It's youth group, it's worship, it's prayer. Right? So, and then this is spiritual content for the average 15 to 23-year-old. Okay? So the thing that we want to remember is how are we helping young people filter through this nearly 3,000 hours of screen media? How are we helping them to look at that and the information they get every day? How are we helping them to know what to look at, what not to look at? Why am I saying that? Who am I listening to? Be critical thinkers about this. But then also, how are we making most of the time that we have with them, right? Recognize that we have limited time with them. How are we making sure that we're getting as much out of that time as we possibly can to help them deeply understand their baptismal faith and develop resiliency, to understand their faith, right? So really, there's a lot here for us to consider. Right? So screen time and thoughtfulness, I do think it's very interesting. This is very different than maybe what we have seen before, which is, so this is above average screen time content to below average screen time content, and then thoughtfulness about content, right? And what we want to, this kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, we want to keep them out of this high level of content with a low level of thought, right? And we want to push them into some thoughtfulness about their content. I think theoretically you want to push them that direction, right, to less content and higher thoughtfulness. But you're going to have some that are going to make a career out of this, and they're going to make a career out of this. They have to be taking in a lot of it, but they're being thoughtful about it, right? So how do we reach that person? Versus, and also, how do we help young people be unplugged if they want to be? Right? More and more young people want to be unplugged. How do I make sure that I communicate with them in a way that supports that? Right? So I work with young leaders right now, and we talk about social media. They're like, I would like to not be on it as much. All right, how else can I communicate with you so that you don't have to be on it? I'm game for that. How do I help support that? Right? So that you can be unplugged. Right? But we want to kind of pull people out of this particular subset. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? All right, last thing on this that I want to make sure of is we don't dismiss the digital. This is a lot of words. I'm going to tell you a story, right? So this is why we can't just completely dismiss digital. Someone's on TikTok. A TikTok user has Parkinson's. They posted a video expressing how hard it was for them to get tiny pills into their hand and take them, right? Because the container that they had was too hard to open. People saw this. So then a guy who directs music videos for a living, knows an obscure fact, figures out he can design a pill bottle to solve the problem. He designs the pill bottle, but he can't do it because he doesn't have a 3D printer. So then they get an army of people with a 3D printer that figure out the schematics to the thing that this guy designed, to figure out how to make the 3D printed bottle that helps this guy get his pill. So they figure it out. They do a dozen test runs. They get a working prototype that has less plastic than your average McDonald's toy. Then they get a patent attorney who catches on to this. The patent attorney helps them patent it and give the patent to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And now, everybody who has Parkinson's, who has a hard time taking this pill, can get a 3D printed copy of the bottle for nothing.
Wow.
None of these people know each other. Right? This is the problem solving that Gen Z is capable of. Right? We can't dismiss it. It's powerful. But it's how we use it that makes a difference. It's how we're conscientious about what we're doing there, right, that makes the difference for us. Yeah. All right. Adolescence is this time where identities are forming, wrestling with and adopting, right? It's our testing ground for our faith and what we believe and does it work in real life, right? So we're asking them, what does God say about that? Where do we have freedom and opportunity to be unique creations? But then where do we need to think through difficult identity and struggles with teens? All right. Looking at my time. Any questions on any of that? We need to linger here. Okay. Connected without community. Right? This is really interesting. So when we think about Gen Alpha, right? Let me just talk about this for a second. Everybody, I want you to picture in your mind your very first smartphone. Or sorry, your very first cell phone. Your very first cell phone. Right? Okay, you said a brick. Whose very first cell phone was like a flip phone that looked exactly like everybody else who had a flip phone in the entire world? Right? Who had that phone? It was a gray Nokia that had a, right? Yeah. It was this big and it flipped open, right? And like if you set it down on a table with everybody else's cell phone, no one could tell because it was all the same. But then the Razor came out. What was special about the Razor?
Motorola Razor?
Yeah.
Thin.
It was thin. And you could get it in some colors.
Yeah, red.
Right? But again, when you flipped it open, it was exactly the same interface, right? Because like you could play you could do phone calls and you could play Snake. Right? All right. Whose first cell phone was a smartphone? Anybody? Oh no, nobody's first cell phone was a smartphone. Gen Z, not a smartphone. What was your first cell phone?
Mine was a Razor.
Here's the Razor.
Well, they brought
okay.
the Razor back though, not the new Razor.
Okay.
I had one of the sliders that had a full keyboard on it.
Okay.
But
Oh, the sidekicks?
Yeah, so you had a full keyboard on your first phone.
It was my
Right?
second phone.
Okay, so I'm gonna guess some of your younger Gen Z are gonna say their first cell phone was an iPhone, right? But an early iPhone, right? And so you had like 2 color options, but you had a full keyboard. And once we kind of get to iPhones, we could get cases, right? So there was a little bit of unique, or you could like adjust the screen, right? Now we're getting to the point where not only can you have like a different color and a different case, but the way that your cell phone looks can be personalized to you, right? That it recognizes your face or your fingerprint, right? It is a personalized piece of technology, right? So we've seen it go from standardized to customizable to personalized. Gen Alpha is going to expect that their technology is going to be personalized to them. My apps in my order that looks at my face and my phone, right? And that personalization is going to be the expectation of baseline, rather than like, oh man, that's super fancy, right? It's not, right? They've had that in their hands most of their lives. Okay, how does that change their interaction? You can find people now that love your niche passion of 5/8 miniaturization trains, right? And become buddies with them across the world. But that relationship lacks a level of consistency, right? A level of one-on-oneness, a personalization that you can't necessarily have in other places, right? And so they're connected, but they're not necessarily in belonging community where they can be honest and open about who they are and what they're struggling with, right? They have lots of parasocial relationships, right, with influencers. I know them, I feel like I know them, I feel like I've watched them grow up or raise their kids, but I haven't necessarily, like it's not a person I have an actual relationship with, right? I read all of their Twitter feed, and so I feel like I know them, and in fact I might be praying for them, or I might be, right, like I feel like I have a relationship with them, but it's not the same, right? And in the same breath, cancel culture can leave them wanting a place that's real, right? If I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing, if I post the wrong thing, even it might not be a wide cancel, right? But my friends could see it, and my friends could not want to be with me anymore, right? We think about cancel culture and that big thing of like a big important person does something and we don't want to pay them, or we don't want them to be famous anymore. But it happens in smaller ways, right? I post the wrong thing and all of a sudden my whole group friends is like, you're out. We don't want to engage with you anymore. Right? So I have to be so conscientious about what I'm putting out there. Right? And so this is a huge peak of loneliness. 73% of Gen Z reports feeling alone, either sometimes or always. Right? They're trying to develop who they are, but they're also trying to solve their own problems. They're trying to do it on their own. And you and I know that they can't. They can't. Right? The world has become DIY, right? I can become my own expert if I watch enough YouTube videos. I can become an expert in anything, right? And so I'm expected to solve all my own problems, right? And they're adolescents, they're still trying to figure things out. And so how can we step into that space and say, hey, you know what? You don't have to do it on your own. You can belong here, right? That you're going to mess it up and that's going to be okay because there's forgiveness in Christ. Right? That these are real relationships that are going to withstand everything. You don't get canceled at church, right? You get forgiven, right? And there's repentance, and that's hard, and you might struggle through that. But we have a place where you can belong, right? It's a message that they desperately need to hear, right?
But what a tug of war, because it's a message they want to hear, but then they need that personalization. They want it to be only to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've read a couple studies on Gen Z is more important with authenticity of how it's being presented than necessarily adaptability to them.
Yeah.
So I've heard if it's authentic, but not exactly how they want it, they'll actually respond pretty well. Where millennials, we wanted everything to be cool and programmed and flashy.
Right.
They crave authenticity.
Yeah.
So we've had that struggle with our church too, saying, how do we target them? I'm like, I think we just got to be honest and real, and listen, but not necessarily change everything for them, but just listen.
So I want to, the thing that we want to think here, right, is if you're thinking youth programming, right, in particular, right, you're thinking less big flashy events, you're thinking more small group support.
No, I'm thinking the future of the church, like, yeah, we don't want to program, because that's
Right?
in the past, but future of the church, this is the future, right? That's gonna be a challenge.
Yeah, it's gonna look way different. Yeah. And the way that we measure success is gonna be very different.
That's right.
Right? The way in which we say, like, you're successful is going to be measured very differently than maybe it was before. Right? And I think we have to kind of be okay with that. Right? We have to say, like, okay, what are the markers we really want to meet? Right? What is the thing our young people really need? Right? And meet that. And not be worried if it's just 3 kids. Right? And not be, I mean, be a little worried, because, like, there's people who need Jesus, but right, but, like, I'm not going to hang my hat on some things that I may be used to, right? And that's going to be real rough for us for a little while. Yeah. No, I use this shirt all the time, so I'm going to not hang out here. But think about the way they form their sense of self, right? Notice that their top 2 for Gen Z are professional and academic achievement, hobbies, and pastimes. I am what I do, right? You are what you do, not who you are, right? Lower than friends, family, religious backgrounds, all of those things, right? And so when we are here, this somehow it feels like community sometimes. My team, my sports team, my work, people feel like a community sometimes, but that's almost a mirage community, right, is a term I've heard used a lot, right? It looks like it, but it isn't really that. And these things that are real community have lowered down in their identity. So how do we teach them this is the community that God's given you, your family, your church, that's going to stick with you? And how do you help them lean into that rather than on their own achievement? FOMO, I heard a little bit of this. They hate being without their phones. Frankly, I don't like the statistic because I don't like to be without my phone for more than 30 minutes. And so, like, I don't want to be judgy about that, right? Like, part of this is adults are guilty of it, too. 30...
Don't they have to give them up in school?
Not necessarily.
They use them in schools.
Yeah, they're cool. Not all of them, but
Right?
more common.
Right? And so now it's become more and more common that, like, parents are texting their kids while they're in school. Like, while they're in class. Like, they have them. And part of me was to say, like, they are looking for people to model good phone usage. I'm not necessarily sure. I will own this. As a human being, I do not model good phone usage for the young people, right? I'm on it I'm on it as much as they are, right? And that's something I struggle with, right? And I try to put limits on my thing. I try to put my phone down, but I get connected to work that way. I'm checking my work email. And it's, I'm the infinite scroll as I'm laying in bed, right? I saw a new statistics that said, like, most of Gen Z, the vast majority of them, are looking at their phone in their last 3 minutes of the day and their first 3 minutes in the morning, right? Like, the last thing is the first thing to do, right? How are we teaching them, as adults, how to model something different? How to model something more healthy? How to model something more balanced, right? We have to start with that. And then once we can do that, we can help them do that. Right? But we can't do that. We can't tell them, hey, put your phones away in church if our phones are out in church. Right? That kind of a thing.
So that's kind of,
Yeah.
so that's kind of a bigger problem, because, okay, as Gen X, we lived experiences, right? Like, we didn't have all this stuff. I fight a lot of technology, just whatever, I'm stubborn. But we lived experiences. I didn't need to TikTok somebody jumping over a fence and getting stuck with barbed wire, because I didn't. Like, I don't need to whatever. So this is, part of this is we need to deal with the family and the parents, because why is your kid watching the phone at home for 2,600, 2,000 hours a year? That's insane to me. Like, you're watching people live usually a fake life, right? A made up TikTok or something, or a fake experience,
Yeah.
instead of having any original experience of your own. And so, yeah, I mean, like, we can't go and snack out, take their phones in the middle of youth group if their parents let them be on it every second they're home and have no authentic life.
Yeah.
Like, how,
You gotta partner with parents on that one,
Well,
right? Because
that's
that's
the
not
thing,
gonna
like, how
happen
do you
just at
do?
church by itself.
you have a class with parents and go, hey,
Yeah.
guys, here's some healthy,
You show them that chart, and you're just like, we gotta figure some of that out, right?
because that's
And,
a huge part of, like, well, I don't have the authority over kids like
right?
that. Like, that's the thing.
So another place that we struggle, right? And I'm gonna say that I don't want to say that this is just Gen Z because I don't think it is. I think this is unilateral. We're not just afraid of risk averse. We're boredom averse, right? I'm boredom averse. When was the last time you stood in the line without your phone in front of you? You didn't.
Go to the bathroom.
When was the last time you went to any activity where you had to sit and wait and sit with your thoughts and you didn't take your phone out? Because a culture, we've become boredom averse, right?
And I think that's sad because I'm still a people watcher.
Right?
When the kids are with me, there's no phone. It's, hey, look at all the goofy
Right.
folks. Like, there's so much stuff to see that's so fun, you know.
And-
But that's the thing is,
You gotta
how
teach
do you
it,
share Jesus when you're in, I can't, 30-second snippets of attention.
right?
That's the,
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, one, you gotta partner with parents on that, right? That can't just be in your church, right? But you also, I think, again, it goes back to that authenticity, and I say to my young people, you gotta hold me accountable. You're gonna watch me pick up my phone at a time I shouldn't, and you gotta call me on it. You gotta tell me to put my phone away, right? We're gonna practice together how we model putting our phones away while we eat a meal together and just talking. We're gonna model it together. We're gonna figure it out, right? And that's okay. I can be honest about that, and I can say, okay, guys, I don't know if it's gonna suck, but like if we're gonna do this Bible study, let's make sure that my technology is away. And your technology is away. And even if I prep using my Bible on my phone, I need to have my physical Bible with me, right? Because I forget, and then I am and then my phone is out, and then I'm right. Like there's pieces to this that I think we can be genuinely honest about and say like, this is what we're trying to figure out. How do we work this together to figure out a better way forward? Does that make sense?
We teach it through tithing. The kids tithe their time at youth group, so when I run youth group with my high schoolers, I say, guys, phones in the foosball table. So they line all their phones on the foosball table, and there's 3 kids that always hide their phones. And I'm like, guys, we're not starting, but I did it through tithe. I said, you're tithing your time right now. You guys don't give money. You guys don't do this. Tithe your time right now. And I said, if you want to come to youth group and just have fun and be on your phone, I don't want to do youth group anymore because we got to talk about Jesus. And so I got buy-in with that. Because they're like, oh, we can tithe an hour. We can tithe, whatever. And then I do it too.
Yeah.
And then sometimes like, crap, I got something on my phone. And I'll grab it, I'll read it like something because I'll save it, and then I'll put it back real quick. And they don't fight that either. They know I'm the adult leader. Like they you know what I mean? Like
Right.
I model it, but I'm also not on my phone. But I'm also being ridiculous because I'll show them stupid videos that I saw before youth group. So like there's that. You can do it biblically and talk about tithing, or there's ways you can do it, and I never asked parents' permission, and I haven't got any blowback yet. So
And I think
Looking for a call?
we talk about
I've only been there 4 months.
and it's a conversation about priorities too, right? If my fear is missing out, when I say, there is nothing that you are going to miss out on that is going to be more important than spending time together with us in God's Word. Right? There's nothing more important that's going to happen for you except worship. Right? You're not going to miss anything because this is the most important thing. Right? And when I think about that in terms of my priorities and I articulate to them, right, those things, and I'm like, guys, if this is what we believe, then these are the actions we take as a result of that. Right? Right? I think the other thing I want to mention is a little bit is about feedback, right? It used to be that you had to wait till the end of your semester to get feedback from your teacher, right? You had to wait until your yearly review at work to get your feedback from your boss. 57% of Gen Z wants to receive feedback from their manager several times a week.
Oh my.
Right? They want feedback. Why? Because if I post it, I immediately know if people like my outfit. right? If I put it out there, I immediately know if people think that joke is funny. If I ride in an Uber, I give them a rating, they give me a rating. When I get my food, they give a rating and I get a rating. And like everything gets a rating. Right? And they are so used to immediate feedback. Gen Alpha is going to be the same way. They're so used to immediate feedback. Right? So how do we help them? Either step into some spots where like, okay, like if you're going to step into leadership, we want a young person to step into leadership, how am I making sure that I'm giving them some feedback? Right? How do I help support that? Right? And also am I teaching them that maybe you don't need all of that feedback? Right? There's some resiliency here that we got to build, right? There's some pieces out of this you're not going to get feedback on, or you don't want the feedback, right? Because you know what's right, even if the feedback is bad, right? But I think helping them think about that. I think when I mentor young leaders now, right, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, how can I help them, give them kind of the feedback that they need so that they feel comfortable so that they can do the next thing. Right? And how do I help them so they can do the next thing? Right? Because that's just the loop that they're used to. Right? I don't necessarily see that changing tremendously. Right? We're kind of used to that instantaneous feedback. I'm looking at our time, wanting to get through the next couple, so I'm going to go a little faster. Right? We're getting more ethnically diverse. We're understanding more about what we call neurodiversity, so that would include mental health situations as well as things like autism and ADHD, right? They're going to lump all of those together in a term that they're calling neurodiversity, right? And this is where we kind of maybe struggle a little bit with the mental health becoming an identity thing, right? But being more aware of socioeconomic diversity, right? Because they're seeing and have access to people of all sorts of different socioeconomic statuses, both good and bad, right? High and low, right? They're all over those things. They're seeing our politics be divided more and more, and that self-selecting media often produces an echo chamber. Remember that algorithm that's trying to keep you there. That algorithm is feeding you more and more of the same information that they know you want to hear and watch, and not naturally giving you anything outside of that echo chamber. Right? So how are we helping them think critically about the things that they're hearing, making sure that they're staying outside of an echo chamber, that they're hearing other things, and using that filter to know what's right and what's wrong based on our biblical values, right? And not necessarily, and helping them to learn to formulate good arguments and understanding and loving each other, right? Whether or not we can go into a lot of places here, and I don't want us to get into a disagreement here, but we do see that millennials and even more Gen Z are thinking about things like racism very differently than generations before them, right? And they're thinking about it a lot more in our world than before those things. And so we are going to see some push and pull between generations on some of these topics. And we've got to find some space where we can have some conversations together. Right? We use this term all the time. You're going to hear us say it in youth ministry. You were young once, but you are not young. Maybe some of you are young now. A couple of you. But you are never young right now. Right? So you cannot assume that because you hit a certain same situation once, you're like, oh, I understand how that looks. Because it's gonna look different now. Right? And so there is some connected moments where you can say like, yeah, I know what it's like to be heartbroken for the first time. Yeah, I know what it was like to lose my first job. Yeah, I know what it's like, right? Those things. But you don't necessarily know how they look right now when that heartbreak turns into online bullying, right? When that lost job becomes a desperate search on LinkedIn for hundreds of other jobs, right? Like, right? You were young once, right? Use that to connect, but you were not young right now. So you got to ask a lot of questions.
My granddaughter said it very well. It's much harder to be a teenager today than it was in your day, grandmother. And I said, you're right. You're absolutely right.
You could not pay me enough. You couldn't pay me enough to be a teenager right now. Like, I mean, honestly, like I look at that and I go, man, I have all the empathy in the world. The way that they're faced with so much struggle, right? Like we want to build empathy for them. so that we listen well to them. Yeah.
I understand that the Gen Z folks want feedback. How are they at giving feedback to people who are trying to help them? What's working, what's not working? Are they willing to speak up on what's effective to them?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how far in the future that slide is. Okay. I think they are. I hear more and more when people are interested in mentorship, right? Because I think mentorship comes with a relationship, right? I don't want to call them the feedback they get is really part of that risk aversity, right? Part of that feedback loop is wanting to make sure I'm doing the right thing before I take the next step so that I can avoid risk, right? And so part of that is teaching them you got to step into some risk, even some relational risk, right? But also, like, part of that is I want relationships around me who help me make sure I'm on the right track, right? Now, they're not just gonna, like, they're not asking you to come up and just take straight feedback, right? Like, you're not gonna walk up to like, let me tell you all the things that I noticed, right? Like, you want to do that in the context of relationship, right? So if you're getting to know young people, recognizing that the more you see them, the more you know them, the more you understand them, speaking those things into them is very helpful for them, right? They want to be seen and they want to be known. So treat them seriously, give them time to really dive, right? We want to stop, I'm going to say this, as older adults we want to stop blaming and labeling them and assuming we know what's happening. Here's what I'm telling them. What I'm telling them is don't just judge older adults based off of a bunch of assumptions you're making about them, right? That goes both ways, right? That's a both ways kind of thing, right? Because they can fall into that trap just as easily as we can, right? And identifying that gospel as a common ground, right? But we're here together, and we're in it together because we're part of the body of Christ together, right? And how will we do this together? Yes, ma'am.
When you have the line, identify the gospel as common ground, that's great. And can you tell us, give us some statistics on faith?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at my time and I'm going to do this. I know you guys are going to hate me. I know, I'll come back to it, I promise. So, 33% of Gen Z has reached adulthood has no religious preference. That's what we're looking at right now. Okay? And about a quarter of LCMS congregations report that they do not, only a quarter of LCMS congregations report that they have had a confirmation every year from 2015 to 2017. Right? So what we're going to see is about half of your congregations in any given year don't have any confirmats. Okay? If you want the bigger retention markers, we retain about 1 in 5 young people in the LCMS from baptism to young adulthood. Right? So I threw a bunch of numbers at you. I can show you those stats. Right? Now, about half of them have, a quarter have them all 3 years. In any given year, we have about half. And those are going to be different kids, right? So you're going to see more of those years where you have 1 and then you have 3, and then you have 8, and then you have none, and then you have, rather than having big confirmation every year. Is that tracking? Is that what you were looking for? Not great. I mean,
But that's not all on Gen Z either. That's
no.
on parents.
Let's be real. If you look at our book relationships count, this downhill started with boomers. Boomers left, and we kind of ignored that the boomers were leaving, and then Gen X left, and we kind of ignored that Gen X was leaving, and then we got to Gen Z, and we were like, or millennials, and we were like, wait a second, something is amiss. And then by the time we researched millennials, and we were like, oh no, things are amiss. Then we're Gen Z, right? So this is not just a sudden drop, right? It's a gradual decline. And we trust that God is God of the church, right? But this is not, we don't say this to be hopeless, right? I do say this to say, as you're working with Gen Z and Gen Alpha in your community, they may not have ever had any exposure to the gospel. Right? So being conscientious that they're not going to necessarily know church terms, they're not going to necessarily have any exposure to know who Jesus is and what he said. And while we can take great joy in being able to be the first person to share Jesus with them, we can also lament that we're the first person to share Jesus with them. Right?
Well, my sixth grade confirmand, the entire class doesn't know any of the basic Bible stories that we basically know. They don't know the stories of Noah and Moses and Jonah, and they know that there was a story about a big fish, but they don't know anything else. And so I'm finding that with my sixth grade confirmands, I'm going back to the Bible basics and then bringing them up through that. So we're kind of skipping what we normally should be covering in confirmation, just to give them the basic Sunday school knowledge.
This is in football.
Yeah.
We do high school youth, and I can honestly say a majority of the youth that we work with, we've never seen, would not even know what their parents look like. And they come to youth group, but not to church.
And again, then now we're looking at different markers of success, right? And maybe what we had thought about in terms of youth ministry in the past, right? And to be able to say, okay, this is where we're at, right? This is the situation that we're in. How do we best share the gospel? How do we help them deeply understand their baptismal faith or get baptized, right? How do we help them develop a resilient identity in Christ? How do we help them get back to vocation? How do we get to those places from where we're at? Right? And the only way we do that is identifying where we're at, right? I mean, part of what we think about when we think about this data is the data only just tells you the spot where we're in, right? The data is not the last word. The last word is Jesus, right? The data just tells us where we're at. It only serves us to help us to better share the gospel, right? Okay. I'm looking at our time. I know I don't want to hold you guys the whole 90 because y'all are tired. Can I do 2 slides if I go backwards? All right.
Can I just say something?
Yes,
real
ma'am.
fast?
Go for it. Yeah.
We have a DC teacher at our church. He is just offering to grandparents for their grandchildren. There's a book at the LCMS offers little Bible studies and then prayer. The grandparents get together one Sunday a month for prayer for their grandchildren. And I think that's a really beneficial program.
Yeah. Okay. So, LHM's data, if you haven't seen it, their work with Barna has been spectacular. Please go look at it. But one of the things they uncovered is I keep looking at it and they're grandparents are some secret sauce in all of this. If you can get in with those grandparents and engaging them with young people, right? Grandparents are powerful influences, right? They got a lot of, many of them have earned the right to be heard, right? And speak into young people's lives. They know that those young people know they are loved, and that they have a level of expertise and life experience that young people really listen to, which I think is hugely powerful, right? So don't get your grandparents in there, right? Okay, so influence over expertise, right? This is where they're looking, right? You want to earn the right to be heard, even if you have expertise, right? So just because you're a pastor doesn't necessarily mean that you're who I'm listening to. Just because you have a degree, that doesn't necessarily mean who I'm listening to, right? And part of that is that Gen Alpha is learning skills learning will be more about skills and less about content expertise, because they're training for jobs that don't exist yet, right? Most of Gen Alpha is training for jobs that that we don't even know what they're going to look like, right? Gen Z is in many ways training for jobs in the future that we don't even know what they are yet because of advances in technology. So for them, it's more it's more about the skills, the ability to learn, the ability to look on and figure it out and unplug it and take it apart and figure it out, and that skill over content expertise. okay? Which makes sense, but it's a struggle for the church because we're like, but we are the experts. And you're like, well, okay, but you still, to some degree, have to earn the right to be heard, okay? Now, experts have common language, influencers do not. So, one of the most powerful questions you have in your toolbox is, what do you mean by that? I'm going to hear you say it, and I'm going to go, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. I want to hear more about that. Because they might use a term, and you're going to instinctively know what you think that term means, but that term might not mean what they mean. Right? And then we start arguing when we have nothing to argue about because we're using the same word differently. Right? And I saw a different Gen Z presentation, she did all the slang, right? How much of that slang, right? I use the wrong emoji and they think I'm mad at them because it's the wrong smiley face, right? So what do you mean by that? Right? So that I could more deeply understand where they're at, so that I can earn the right to be heard. Because when I listen to them well, every time I listen well, I have a little more relational credit with them to be able to share more about what I think. And then I earn more relationship credit, and then I hear what they think, right? So it's the back and forth there. So who's speaking into them, right? And making sure that we're giving them filters for all of those things. Again, we did this already. Real quick, where do you see some hope here? Because I don't want to leave you guys with well, maybe let's do struggle first so I leave you with hope. Where are some of the struggles? You guys identified some of them. Struggles you're seeing.
Are we starting with hope or struggle? Or
Sexual identity.
Sexual identity. All right, let's do struggle first.
Sexual identity
Yeah.
and the acceptance of going in that direction when they're feeling so lost.
Fear.
Fear to fail.
Fear of failure. Fear of the future. Fear of the future. Right?
Constantly shifting community.
Oh. Yeah. I'm in community, but then it's gone. Then it's over here.
It's all like media based.
Yeah.
There's my friend group that was this friend group at this time, and now they're gone. Now I gotta start over.
Right, and who do I have what is not a string? What's it on the Snapchat? Streak, there we go. Who's that? Who do I have a streak with on the Snapchat?
Sometimes it can be community with your family, your parents, who's my mom with now, who's my dad with.
Well, we found like consistency is what they need, right?
So where is he hope?
Yeah, consistency.
Right?
When you can create that consistency and I'm anal about consistency with high school students. Every Sunday night, unless don't hear from me, we're having youth group. Every Sunday, and it's that security blanket for them, right? And consistency, and you're always going to get a text from me on Wednesdays asking for prayer requests. Like those consistencies, they depend on because their world through a pandemic was never.
Mm-hmm. How can a liturgical worship be a consistency, right? That gives them some steadiness, right? Right? How are we providing consistency? How are we providing a safe community that's gonna be here through thick and thin, who's gonna see them through transition, who's gonna be there, right? Yeah.
Social skills for some has been really a challenge because they've been so much on their screen in general.
Yeah.
And so not interacting one-on-one or a group, it's like they don't have as much social skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, working through some of the social skill stuff is going to be because let's be real, after COVID, I lost some social skills, right? Like, the first conference I did post-COVID, I was like, there's so many people, and I've forgotten how to talk, right? So, we can do that together, but yeah. And I'm a grown-up, and they're still forming that, so how do we help them navigate through that, right? Some of those things. One more piece of hope. Anybody hopeful about any of this?
I really loved hearing just the safety, like in the problem solving, to see like how much I miss that they're constantly problem solving because they don't share that with you.
Yeah.
And so that really helps me understand why the anxiety is so heavy and or why they can't articulate just how anxious they are. Because they're problem solving, they don't have time to categorize and put something on a shelf and save it. It's constant. So that was helpful to be able to know.
Right.
When you say, what do you mean by that? Or those sorts of things to help them unpack when it's too much all the time.
Yeah, no, and I am so enthusiastic. We work with young people right now who are in the church, who love Jesus, who wanna help the church, and who have hearts for that. I see so much hope there. I see so much hope in young leaders and being able to share the gospel and speak into that. I think we have a lot of good things to share, right? Recognizing our time, I certainly will be around for the next little bit. If you want the PowerPoints, I saw some of you taking pictures, but if you want these sets, you can just text your email, make sure your email is in there, right, and Gen Z to this number, and I can send it to you, and you can have it to look at and debrief through. But before anybody goes, or any more people go, can I pray for you guys first? Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to you as people who care for young people, who love them, who want to see them follow you for their entire lives. Lord, we ask that you give us wisdom, that you give us patience, that you give us discernment, that we might be able to go forward back into our congregations and care for young people well, that we can share the gospel well. Lord, most importantly, that we can take young people and point them to you and your saving death on the cross and your forgiveness for us. Lord, in a world that is uncertain, help us to be a place that gives your hope as a certainty and your promises as a certainty, their identity in you as a certainty. Give us all these things, be with our young people back home, and bring them to us so that we might share them with you, and we can be your hands and feet. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys. Good night.